When we're together, I think a lot of people look at the Modern Family role and everything that you did as spectacular as you talk about those Emmys and everything that you have done. Do you miss that interaction on a weekly basis or monthly basis? The time that you spent with all those people, whether it was the cast or the crew, just knowing that routine, is that something that you miss?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss it. I think we all miss it. We all stay in touch. Obviously, the cast and we have a great text thread with all of us. But I also have a great text thread with our camera operators and our hair and makeup people and our grips and things like that, our props people. And then when you get the opportunity to dive back into the business, I was on the Santa Clauses and for Disney and our props guy showed up for a day or two, and all of a sudden Miller and I are back like we were for 11 seasons on Modern Family. We all miss the camaraderie. We had a great situation there, a utopia, if you will, of everybody loved each other. We worked reasonable hours. We had a great product, obviously, for 11 seasons. And it really was, I think, if you interviewed and asked most of the crew, it was the best job they ever had, and they wish they could go back. And I feel exactly the same.
So when you first started that, I would assume that it's like I'm a little naive or a little, I guess, out of touch with how this whole process goes. But when you first started the Modern Family show, and you go in, and did you have any idea the camaraderie or the relationships that you had? Did you have a relationship with anybody, or did you not know anybody you were working with at that time?
The only person I had a relationship with, even remotely, was the person that they eventually hired to direct the pilot. His name's Jason Weiner. He directed the pilot in half of the first season. And I knew him from my Chicago improv days and my Los Angeles performing days. And he had kind of moved up the chain in Hollywood as a director. And when they hired him, I'd already gotten the job. But when they hired him, I was like, oh, cool, a familiar face that I'm going to know. But otherwise, I was walking into it just like everyone else would have, as a fan of Ed O'Neill from Married with Children, as a fan of Julie Bowen from Ed and all of the shows she had been in, and Boston Legal and Ty Burrell. All those people were all fans of. I had interactions with some of the writers who had pilots that they were attempting to get made back in through the years. Some of the writers I had auditioned for. Steve Levitan I had auditioned for many years before, but no connection with them personally. Anyone.
So when you go through that and you start this whole process, I mean, you went to school to do something that had nothing to do with acting. So you start this show, you go through and you have all this success, but I know I'm going backwards here, and that's typically what I do is I get things completely backwards from how I want to start. But
because you're coming off of a career of constantly moving forward. So now in retirement, you're going to, do things backwards.
and you know what the great part about that is I have everything written out, and I say, okay, this is how I want this show to flow. And then whatever your first comment is how it usually throws me off, and I work backwards. So here we are. So we're going to work backwards.
That's great.
And so as you go to college, you went to college for criminal justice. Is that right?
Yeah, I wanted to be a prison administrator. I went to school. I didn't want to go to college. My parents sort of made me go to college. My dad said, you're going to college. I wasn't a good student. Don't claim to have been a good student. Did the very least I could to get by. But he said, find something that's interesting to you. So when I went to Kansas State, I was friends with a couple of the football players and basketball players, and they were in something called criminal justice. And I was like, that sounds fun. What's that? So I went that direction and enjoyed those classes. And within that curriculum, I was like, I want to be a prison warden in the federal system. So that's what I was on my track to do until I auditioned for a play at Kansas State, and that sort of changed everything.
So did you have any previous acting experience before you auditioned for that?
Not acting experience. I had performance experience. I was a funny kid, and I wanted to be a clown in the circus when I was younger, which is where the Fizbo the Clown stuff on the show comes from. My dad named me Fizbo when I was just a little boy, and I was performing for kids' parties when I was 11. I was going to a 6-year-old's party when I was 11, doing magic and balloon animals. And so I had a penchant for performing, but never any sort of structured acting experience or anything like that. And that's
So
first came at Kansas State.
yeah, so you go to Kansas State, and then you go through all the things that you went through there, and you get out of school and you start auditioning. When did you go to LA? When did that change directions as far as where you focused your career?
Yeah. First 2 years I went to Chicago because I wanted to go study at the Second City, which is where, a lot of famous comedians that your viewers know, Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch and Chris Farley and Aykroyd's and Chevy Chase, all kind of started at the Second City. And so I wanted to move there. I was familiar with the city of Chicago. So that seemed like an easy move to kind of see like, okay, well, can I do this? Even though people in Manhattan, Kansas said, hey, you're pretty good at acting, I needed to figure that out on a bigger scale. So Chicago seemed like a good move. Spent 2 years there, figured out like, I could have some success here, but why am I going to stay here when I really want to move to LA eventually? So I moved to LA in 1998 and started auditioning. And 12, 13 short years later is when Modern Family happened. And along the way, I had success. I don't think I would have stayed with it if I wouldn't have been having some success. I was an actor that, got work in commercials and guest stars and co-stars and had a career that I think other actors, would have exchanged places with me on, but never having that full creative, like meaningful role. And then Modern Family happened.
So you get the opportunity to go to Modern Family. What do you think the moment was that made you recognizable enough to just get a shot, to actually have a shot to try out for the role? Is there a moment that sticks out to you that got you that opportunity?
Well, my small part in the movie called Almost Famous is probably the most meaningful step in my career, meaning I had done lots of commercials, over 100 commercials. I'd done lots of co-star, or at that point, not a lot of co-stars, but lots of commercials. And then I get this small part in a major motion picture directed by a very respected director, Cameron Crowe. And what that gave me, it's not like my 5 lines were record breaking or anything like that. I think I did a good job and people laughed at that moment. But what it did was give me credibility walking into other rooms, because in our business, I'm sure we can find parallels in all businesses. Everybody's insecure at some level of their job, and they want someone else to validate them. Well, me being an Almost Famous, hired by Cameron Crowe, produced by Steven Spielberg, immediately gives a casting director something to point to and say, see, somebody else thinks he's good too. Here he is auditioning for this. So that literally was the most important moment for me, to get into rooms and have people think like, well, he must be good if Cameron Crowe hired him.
So you get onto Modern Family. You go through all the years with all the cast. Is there? I know this is always a hard question, but is there one particular moment that you look back on in the show and say, that was the coolest role that I played in an episode, that because it was hard to prepare for and I pulled it off?
Well, again, Modern Family in a lot of ways represented circles for me in life. Me wanting to be a clown and me wanting to be in the circus. And then in season 1, me getting a script delivered to me on a rainy day at 20th Century Fox that was titled Fizbo, was a huge moment for my life, my career, my parents. I remember calling them and saying, you're not going to believe this, but the next episode we're shooting is called Fizbo. And then shooting that, my best friend Stacy, who he's the guy at the gas station when we get into the confrontation, to be in the episode with him. My mom flew out while we shot that episode, and she's got a little cameo at the end when I bring the birthday cake into the hospital for Luke after he broke his arm. And then submitting that for an Emmy that next year and winning the Emmy all within a year was the most incredible thing I think I could have ever imagined. I never could have written that down. So that's the easiest one to look towards and say that moment, those moments around that episode are the coolest moments for me. But getting the, auditioning and getting told no, and then having them have me back, and then being told no again and coming back and then finally getting it. But I always tell people my job was to get the part, right? Your job's to win races. That's like, I always thought like getting stickers for making tackles on a football field didn't make any sense to me. It's like, well, that's what you're supposed to do. And in my world, getting the job is what I was supposed to do. It's the day that the network decided to pick the show up for what's called the back nine, because they picked the show up for 13. And I knew for the first time in my 14-year career that I had a job for more than 8 days. I'd never been employed for more than 8 days in my entire career in a row. And so I knew I had a job for 13 weeks. But the day they picked up that back nine, meaning that we were going to shoot 22, 24 episodes. I know back 9, 13 isn't that, but that's just what it's called. The back nine meant that we were going to do a full season. And then in my mind, I could say, well, if we're going to do one season, we're sure going to do 2 seasons. And if we're going to do 2 seasons, they definitely want 3 seasons. And then it's at that moment that I can visualize my life changing. I can see that even though I got the job and I was really excited about that, but again, I always looked at it as like, well, that's my job. This moment, this time when they said, we're going to pick you guys up for an additional back nine, that's when I thought, okay, now I can see my life changing.
Do you ever see it coming out as a movie, or is that just, with everything that's changed, is that just a tough scenario at this point?
I don't think it's an impossibility. I mean, look, Chris and Steve created a great group of people. Like they put together an incredible group of people, cast and crew, and everything has its time. We had our time. 11 years is incredible. But as you've seen with The Office had an incredible run, and they've had a resurgence, and now people want more of them. I don't think it's an impossibility that something will come along and say, hey, let's check in with those people from Modern Family again and see where they are in their life. I think we would all jump at the opportunity, jump at the chance to get together again and do that. It just is going to take somebody to want to do it, and Steve and Chris to say yes.
So what's on the horizon? What's next? What are you working on this side of the world?
Well, I did the show The Santa Clauses, and I really enjoyed that. I love being with Tim Allen, and I love being in that world with the North Pole. They didn't unfortunately pick it up for a 3rd season. I was hoping they would, and was really disappointed that they didn't. I think families really enjoyed that, and we need more shows like that where we can all sit around and watch those kinds of shows. And I'm, pitching ideas. I'm out there in the world with things, talking to studios and networks, and have some ideas in the hopper. But, I wanted to just be the right thing. And I was so fortunate when Modern Family ended to have Lindsay, my fiance, who was home in Kansas City, where I'm from. My dad, unfortunately, was at the end of his life and getting sicker and sicker. And then the pandemic happened. So I made the choice to move back to Kansas City. And it's been an incredible experience. It's been so fun. As you know, we're building a house, and that's an exciting thing. That's really where most of my creativity is going right now is the conception and visualization and thought and process of building a house. But the right TV thing will come along, and, I'll know when it happens, and we'll see what it is. I don't know what people want to see me do. So many people know me as the character, and I look forward to, showing a different side of my abilities, and something a little more closer to who I am as a person. Maybe probably boring.
Yeah, and I think that's always the unique part for me and you and just knowing you. Your personality and the your life and the way that you live and the things that you do are always so fascinating to me. So I think that would definitely be fun to see.
race fans, thanks for watching our video. For all NASCAR on Fox News content and the best clips from Fox Sports, be sure to follow and subscribe to our channel.